A couple of years ago, I felt compelled to read the Constitution. Actually, I felt guilty for not reading it. I thought I'd better read this document, and I started reading it, got to Article 1, Article 2, and then Section 1, last paragraph, and it changed my life. My head spun. I knew the President had taken an oath, but to actually see it in print, where he swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, I thought, wow, I just saw President Obama say the Constitution is fundamentally flawed. Senator Bennett says, well, there's so many different interpretations of the Constitution. But I thought, wait a minute, how can we interpret the Constitution? Many different interpretations. There's an answer to that. Is it original intent? And I have discovered it's not original intent. Alexander Hamilton was opposed to Thomas Jefferson. Now, you may know what one of the clauses in the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson hated. He said it will destroy our country. And he's right. He was very upset with the borrowing clause in Article 1, Section 8. The borrowing clause. Well, Alexander Hamilton was excited about that clause because he represented the bankers who wanted to own the money like they do now and create it, and with it being their property, and then loan it to us. And Alexander Hamilton said a national debt is a national blessing. Think about it. If you have a money tree in your backyard and it's legitimate, I mean it's growing money, does it create debt for you or assets? Does it create assets for you or debt? Exactly. Well, Article 1, Section 8 gave the power to Congress to create money. Alexander Hamilton said a national debt is a national blessing. I guess he was afraid that if Congress really had the control of money and could create it, that they'd spend like crazy because there would be no need for taxing. And so he thought, well, we've got to control it and own it and give them a debt, and then they won't spend out of control. How can we interpret the Constitution? It's not original intent because we don't want Alexander's original intent. Jefferson's was pretty good, I thought. And it's not in favor of the federal government at the expense of the unalienable rights, but it's God's intent. But we need to go back to God's intent. To me, the Ninth Amendment is the voice of God. The Ninth Amendment. The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage the other rights retained by the people. Well, what are the rights retained by the people? Well, what does that mean? What are the rights retained by the people? Well, what are the rights retained by the people? We know it's a self-evident truth that we have unalienable rights from our Creator. If it's unalienable, then Congress can't take them away, can they? So Congress doesn't have the power. The Supreme Court justices don't have the power. Judges don't have the power. Police forces don't have the power to change that, to take away those rights. They can only disparage or deny them or violate them. Trump, checkmate. No construing. And what trumps that, what makes that trump and checkmate, is we go to the second clause in the Declaration of Independence, self-evident truths that we have unalienable rights from our Creator. So Jefferson was right because the 10th is similar to the 9th, and I believe, like I said, that the 9th Amendment purifies the document. Why is it important to study the Constitution? I believe so we can go to the 9th and go to the Declaration of Independence and say, hey, we just trumped your construing. And that's why it's so important for us as citizens to understand the document so we can defend it, because it is defensible. It is beautiful. So as I've studied the Constitution, I think, wait a second, am I obligated to this document? I know our representatives are, and I know all federal and state employees are. President Obama is. But am I? And it's like, I am. It's called I call it the implied oath. Now, we as citizens have an obligation. We have an implied oath. All of our representatives in Washington, D.C. have sworn or affirmed to protect, defend, support the Constitution. Defend. Who is the biggest enemy to the Constitution? So I'm thinking, okay, what's the biggest enemy? And it connects to what Jefferson was saying and what his fight was. Now, you may know what one of the clauses in the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson hated. He said it will destroy our country. And he's right. He was very upset with the borrowing clause in Article 1, Section 8. The borrowing clause. Jefferson was vehemently against that borrowing clause. Well, Hamilton said a national debt is a national blessing. How in the heck could anyone say that? But I think I understand why. He was wrong, but he felt like we couldn't handle the power to create money, which would eliminate the national debt. Who is the biggest enemy to the Constitution? It's the Federal Reserve shareholders, the people behind the curtain. Why is the Federal Reserve such a big enemy? He said it will destroy our country. And he's right. Bernanke is doing everything he can to say the economy will crash. Why? Is that a threat? To protect oversight? When they create $1 trillion, it is their property. It's not supposed to be their property. Thou shalt not steal. So the question arises, how much has the Federal Reserve shareholders been acquiring in assets since 1913? Abraham Lincoln was vehemently opposed to a central bank owning, a private group of people owning and controlling and loaning us our own money. Andrew Jackson, he called them vipers. There was another person, too, that was against a central bank owned by private people. His name was Thomas Jefferson. He was very upset with the borrowing clause in Article 1, Section 8. Think about it. Most people in America believe that our government, our federal government, is creating money out of thin air and then doing whatever they want with it. Well, wait a second. If they were doing that, why would they need to tax anyone? Why would they need to borrow it from anyone? Well, when money is created out of thin air, the people who create it and are allowed to own it and loan it are the ones that we borrow from. It's a simple problem. And with enough public awareness, we can understand what Ron Paul is saying. Hey, 1.6 trillion of the national debt is fictitious because a private entity should not be allowed to create money out of thin air and then loan it to a government that has to pay it back. I was watching a congressional hearing. Bernanke was asked, hey, you don't have congressional authority to give trillions of dollars to foreign banks and to places we have no concept of where it's going. Article 1, Section 8 does not give you the authority. It says all money from the Treasury has to be legislated. You can't do that without permission from the Congress. And Ben Bernanke, you know what he said? Maybe you saw it. It's on YouTube. You can see it. It's not coming from the Treasury. Congressman Paul is saying 1.6 trillion of the debt is fictitious because it's borrowed from the Federal Reserve and they create it from nothing to borrow it. Well, they've been loaning money to China too. Why are they loaning money to China? I thought China had so much money they were loaning it to us. Well, Article 3, Section 3 defines that as treason. Aid and comfort to enemies of the United States or unknown places where they can get it. Most of America believes that when they create $1 trillion, the government owns it. But you know what? America believes that if money is created, it creates debt. Created money doesn't create debt, except to the one that's borrowing it. But what does it do for the person that created it? It creates assets. So the assets of the Federal Reserve, if we have a real audit of the Federal Reserve, it's going to blow our minds and we're going to get so mad. And that's why Bernanke is doing everything he can to say and to protect that from happening, keep that from happening, and that's why he threatens us. It sounds like a promise, but he says, oversight, the economy will crash. Why? Is that a threat? Sounds like a threat to me. You look at the history of the central banks and Federal Reserve, that's what they say. When people start to find out what they're doing and they start to stop their actions, that's what they say. Hey, you end us, we'll end you. Well, if I were a criminal, Federal Reserve banker, Federal Reserve shareholder, there's a difference, well, we better buy some protection because when the people find out, they're going to be mad. Martin Luther, when he had the Bible published, what happened? All hell broke loose. People saw the truth. So what do? They buy protection. Publishing companies, media, newspapers, congressmen, senators. And they have been buying for 99 years. 99 years? Andrew Jackson stopped him for 74, 75. Andrew Jackson called the central banksters vipers. But I don't think people don't understand it. They think it's, interest and inflation. Oh, they're creating all this unbacked money and it's causing inflation. BS. The company store is fluctuating the prices. 16 trillion, and what do you get? Another day older and a deeper in debt. Well, I say interest and taxes from shore to shore. The Federal Reserve is the company store. With God's help, just a small percentage of this American public, we can change it. The signers of the Declaration of Independence, it was a successful thing that they did. And it was because God helped them. That's what they said. And I say to people, I say to my friends, I say, hey, it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. That's irrelevant. The point is, the greatest country in 5,000 years was developed and founded on a belief in God. As you know, there are 4 references to God in the Declaration of Independence. And the question arises, well, who is this God? For 4.5 months, the founders, the signers of the Constitution, deliberated and scrutinized every word with its definition. And they all signed on to the Constitution, including Article 7. Well, Article 7 tells us who the God of the Declaration of Independence is. Our Lord. Those 2 words are in Article 7. Well, historically, if you break the oath of office or break the oath, you invoke negative. You invoke the vengeance of God upon you. You invoke a negative life. But if you promote it and defend it and uphold it, you promote just the opposite. And I swear, my life is so much better because I talk about the Constitution, what I've learned in it, and I promote it and I defend it.